it's going to be very, very good for people to kind of overcome this mass gaslighting and have the same sense of community they maybe only felt at Navalny's funeral. You know, people don't protest in Russia. All protest has been like violently suppressed, essentially. And so to kind of have this moment of community is great, but at the same time, if they are voting, that does also serve to legitimize the Putin regime because he wants the high turnout. So
we are the election station, and the election in Russia is looming, although it doesn't have much jeopardy compared to the other elections we're focusing on this year. Vladimir Putin is certain to secure the presidency for yet another 6 years. That will be the latest election he's won, going back all the way to 2000. Evgeny Popov is a Russian MP and a pro-Kremlin TV host. He picked the winner on Times Radio Breakfast earlier this morning.
It's no doubt that Putin will be the next president of Russia because Russian people wants to see him as a president. And I don't know why it's not a good news for you. Your colleague told that it's bad news for us that Putin will rule Russia again. It's a good news for us, for Russians. That's the main topic. And, I don't care who rules Great Britain. You will be the enemy of my country, whatever prime minister you have. It's the best thing that the Western democracy is better than ours. I don't know why. You just tell your viewers about extremists. You are jailing people for social media posts. You have a prime minister which is not being elected by people. How many people voted for Rishi Sunak? Would you tell me, please? But I can tell you that millions of people in Russia voted for Putin for years.
Okay, that's fine. We will be having an election.
We're an enemy whatever we think, which is a good thing because we think their democracy is rotten. In the last election, Putin won nearly 78% of the vote. How does he do it? Aliide Naylor is a Russian journalist and the author of Shadow in the East, Vladimir Putin and the Baltic Front. Good morning to you.
good morning. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It was a really interesting interview with Evgeny. It was really the undiluted view from the Kremlin of what democracy is. And he said, well, look, your prime minister's not elected. Our president is elected with true democracy. There are actual opponents of him that exist. He just convinces people to vote for him. Can you explain some of the shortfalls in that view of Russian democracy?
I mean, I didn't really know where to start with this. There was so much wrong with everything Evgeny said this morning. And it's going to be hard to do this without swearing as well.
Or maybe just swear a little bit.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, that is one way of securing the votes through intimidation tactics. And that is something that Putin has completely deployed on every level of society. I mean, we've seen recently, Alexei Navalny, of course, he was murdered. And, it's so farcical that it makes you question, like, what's the point of even, like, running the elections in the first place? And I suppose that itself is to create an illusion of consensus in Russia.
Well, I'm interested in that, Aliide, because he's an authoritarian dictator in all but name. Well, how does it work then? What happens? Do people who want to vote against him, do they get intimidated so they don't vote? Do their votes get not counted? Do the opposition get shrunk so badly there's no one else to vote for? How does this system of democratic autocracy actually work in practice?
Well, there are multiple ways in which this can be executed. So he can obviously win through good old-fashioned election fraud. What he really wants is a high voter turnout, which he can use to signal his legitimacy. So historically, the government has used bribery, intimidation, blackmail to encourage voter turnout. Like you said before, in 2018, Russia claimed around 77% of the votes, and they probably want to secure a higher figure this year. So this is through state employees, the ruling United Russia Party members. They're usually expected to vote. The latter are supposed to take 10 people with them, I believe, this time, according to Meduza, which is a Russian opposition outlet. Students and young professionals are also specifically being targeted by regional authorities. The government has expanded electronic voting, and it's also taking place over the course of 3 days. So this is to kind of basically ship as many people in as possible to keep voting. And they're maximizing the opportunities for people to vote while increasing the pressure. There's the sorry.
And can you vote in private? I mean, I'm just wondering if I was someone who didn't support Vladimir Putin. Of course, I have all the media shouting at me, telling him he's great. I have all the whole apparatus of the state promoting him, but if I wanted to, can I go there, privately vote, know my vote will be counted, and then go away from the ballot box knowing that no one will know I voted against Putin?
Well, a vote against Putin isn't really a vote against Putin in these elections, if that makes sense. So there are only 3 quote unquote opposition candidates who are standing, and they vote in line with the ruling party on all issues. So basically a puppet opposition. And there's not really any alternative. And
And will
yeah,
the death
there
of
were
and will the death of Navalny look like a warning? That's another example, I suppose, of intimidation, isn't it? That here's someone who stood up to Putin. Look what happened to him.
yeah. It can act as an intimidation tactic. I think like one thing that the opposition in Russia has kind of suggested to kind of stand against. I suppose like Russia makes people feel very, very isolated and like they're alone in their opposition to the political regime. And those it can have a very kind of, I mean, you used the word gaslighting when you spoke to Evgeny earlier, and that's exactly what it is. You know, it's kind of mass gaslighting on like a nationwide scale. And so we're seeing these kind of pockets of strategizing. And there's this so-called Noon Against Putin strategy this coming Sunday to undermine the Kremlin's efforts. So it's kind of an initiative put forth by an opposition politician who suggested that anyone who doesn't support Putin should go to the polls at exactly midday on March the 17th and to vote for anyone but Putin, which, you know, I have mixed feelings about. It's going to be very, very good for people to kind of overcome this mass gaslighting and have the same sense of community they maybe only felt at Navalny's funeral. You know, people don't protest in Russia. All protest has been like violently suppressed, essentially. And so to kind of have this moment of community is great, but at the same time, if they are voting, that does also serve to legitimize the Putin regime because he wants the high turnout. So
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, it's such a good point that if you vote at all, you're actually playing his game. But if you don't vote, you're also playing his game in a different sense because you're not opposing him. That's how these things work, isn't it? That's how you end up with a dictator who gets voted in. Aliide, really interesting stuff. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's Aliide Naylor there, journalist and the author of Shadow in the East, Vladimir Putin and the Baltic Front.